Welcome everybody. This is Melissa Skidmore. I'm going to be displaying my PowerPoint on adolescent anxiety and depression health concerns. The first slide that I have is a description of the anxiety uh, that I will be discussing. So, description about anxiety would be being separated from parents, being terrified about a specific thing. Maybe it's a dog, maybe it's a situation, maybe it's a place. Um, Adolescents are probably going to they could be frightened at school or in social settings. They might not to want to go to those places and have a complete fear of that. They could be nervous about upcoming events that are happening or bad things that could be occurring that they might be forecasting. And the onset of anxiety can be very sudden and acute. It's disabling, it's penetrating. Symptoms could be heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, feeling lightheaded, unsteady, or sweaty. These are all signs and symptoms of anxiety that we should all be aware of. The description for depression that I found was feeling unhappy or hopeless. They're ill-tempered or a good deal of time, they're just kind of down and out most of the time. They don't want to go and enjoy things. They don't want to go and be a part of things. They can have fluctuation in their eating patterns. They might eat more, they might eat less, they might have variations in their sleeping patterns. They might be up most of the night, or they might sleep a lot and not come out of their rooms and just be super tired all the time. Exhibiting factors could be fatigue, lethargic. They also could go the other way and they could be edgy and agitated. And you could feel like you're walking on eggshells around people that are dealing with depression. They might not have a good attention. They might be able to not pay attention very well, and they might feel insignificant or inadequate or guilt-ridden. And you could notice self-injury and self-destructive behaviors with people that are depressed. The statistics that I found locally, statewide, nationally, and worldwide do have some statistics on anxiety, not very many, but most of it was on depression. The first was locally. I live in Morgan County, so I looked up the Weber Morgan County's um, statistics, and 23.2% of adults age 18 and older reported a depressive disorder. This isn't the adolescents that I was looking for, but it's statistics that I could find locally. Statewide in 2017, 30% of high school students, so this was more my age range that I was looking for, had depression symptoms. And then nationally, I did find some anxiety statistics on adolescents. So 7.1% of children aged 3 to 17 years have diagnosed anxiety, and 3.2% of children ages 3 to 17 years have diagnosed depression. So I found those statistics interesting nationally. And then worldwide, over 300 million people are affected by depression. So those are the statistics I was able to gather for depression and anxiety. Some contributing factors that happen and social determinants of health that can happen with anxiety and depression are race and ethnicity. Certain races don't find it necessary to go to the doctor and unless something very dire, really bad has happened. They might not believe in going and doing their preventative care or their yearly visits with their primary care physician. And their health-related behaviors might be different than ones that we might be familiar with. Um, Obviously, their socioeconomic status is going to be, going to add to anxiety and depression. 16% of families with adolescent youth in the United States are living in poverty, and those families have an increased risk for anxiety and depression. And 36% of families with adolescent youth are living in low-income situations. So those are also going to add to the statistics and increase those statistics for uh, anxiety and depression. Rural and urbans, if people live really far away and don't have those health activities available to them or those health amenities, that's going to be a social determinant also in anxiety and depression. The next slide talks about specific concerns that we might have with anxiety. Trauma can cause anxiety. Stress due to an illness can cause anxiety. Stress buildup, whether it's from school or work, those can add. Personality tendencies, can make people a little bit more anxious. Mental health disorders such as depression can add to anxiety, and having blood relatives with an anxiety disorder can give a person a little bit more tendencies to have that. Obviously, drugs and alcohol can be a problem also. Contributing factors for depression: biochemistry, differences in chemicals in the brain can cause depression that people might suffer from. Genetics, like I said with anxiety, can be a precursor. Personality, individuals might just have a low self-esteem, or those individuals that are easily overwhelmed, those generally pessimistic appear to be more likely to experience depression also. Environmental factors, those people that are continuously being exposed to violence, neglect, abuse, or poverty may be more vulnerable to having depression because of their situation. Root causes that I found for anxiety and depression is basically a synopsis of the last two slides. It's hard to define a specific cause for anxiety. There's a lot of things that play into anxiety, and it's usually just not one situation that causes anxiety. Adolescence, and with stress in school or with friends, trauma, complications at home, drug and alcohol use, social media, all of those things can add to anxiety in adolescence. And depression, very similar. There's not single one root cause for that. There's many contributing factors, and medical illness could induce depression, life changes, inherited tendencies, that genetic predisposition, stress in school or with friends, social media, increased exposure in violence, neglect, abuse, all of those, and poverty all have a playing factor in depression. Talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that basic physiological, the need, for air, food, water, health, all of those things most likely in today's society are being met. But the unmet needs would first come with safety. Those that don't feel safe are going to probably have increased anxiety and depression. And obviously it goes from there. If they're not feeling love and belonging, if they don't have esteem, if they, they don't have that self-actualizations, all of those are going to play a factor in having anxiety and depression. Functional level of adolescence with anxiety, depression, it totally depends on how severe the anxiety or depression is, and how they're able to function. And outcomes, if it's severe, or not good, they obviously will have a sluggishness in mental and motor responses. They'll probably answer briefly. They'll have intense feeling of tiredness. They'll be disinterested. They'll have deep sadness and a dissatisfaction with themselves. Communicable diseases, I really didn't find a lot of communicable diseases associated with depression, anxiety, but patients that do suffer from anxiety and depression could have issues with substance abuse, unsafe sexual activities, tobacco use, increased consumption of alcohol, or many other unsafe behaviors that could inadvertently cause them health issues. Non-communicable diseases or infections to do with anxiety, depression, and depression is substance abuse or misuse. They could have a body image disturbance. They could be, obese or too thin. They could suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They might have an obsessive compulsive disorder. They might have a learning disorder or any mental illness. Those could be contributing to a non-communicable diseases. Specific concerns concerning self-care with anxiety, depression. If those individuals that are having problems with anxiety, depression, if they can try to institute a healthy eating plan, have less preservatives, lots of fruits and vegetables, those type of things can make them feel better and can help with the anxiety, depression. Exercise is a huge component, and studies have shown if you can get 60 minutes of exercise in every day, that will help with anxiety and depression. Enough sleep obviously is going to help, and the mindfulness and relaxation techniques can be a huge helpful component in self-care for anxiety and depression. Obviously, there's a lot of self-harm that can happen with anxiety, depression. People might drive recklessly. They might binge drink. They might take too many drugs. They could have unsafe sex. They could be cutting themselves, or the detrimental cause of suicide, which is prevalent in our society, could be self-harm. Risks for harm to others with depression or anxiety, mostly, a lot of it could be depression, but you could find apparent cuts, bruises, or cigarette burns. Usually they're found on the wrists, arms, thighs, and chest. They might not expose themselves, even in hot weather. They might always wear long sleeves because they're trying to hide those cutting marks in places that they've hurt themselves. They probably will have a low mood, or they're tearful, or they have just a lack of motivation in anything that they're doing or dealing with. They could have self-disgust, not wanting to go on, and just and they might be very reserved. They might not be open to communication, and precursors to low self-esteem, blaming others for any other problems, and they could be undergoing or thinking that they're not good enough for something. And indications that they're pulling their hair out could also be another risk for harm to others. So this is the PowerPoint that I was able to gather and the information with my reference page at the very end, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.